Then later in the day, we got a press conference by President Biden, although they're not really press conferences, because when you give a press conference, I think the word conference in and of itself implies that there's a discussion, right? That you're going to field some questions from the reporters, right? After all, what's the point of having a room full of reporters if you're not going to let the reporters ask you questions, right? So if the president just wants to make a statement, he can make a statement from the Oval Office. He doesn't have to go into a room with a bunch of reporters. And what's the point of the reporters even going to the room to be in the same room with the president, right? And risk getting COVID or spreading COVID, right? Everybody's worried about COVID. Well, why have an unnecessary conference if the president isn't going to take a single question? Obviously, Biden wants to create the impression that he's giving a press conference. He wants people to see him standing in a room with a bunch of reporters, but he's not even taking any questions. The minute he finishes his prepared remarks, everybody starts, Mr. President, Mr. President. He turns around and walks right out. The whole thing is a show. He wants to create the appearance that he's giving a press conference, but he's not. He's just delivering a statement because he doesn't have the guts to field any questions, because he probably doesn't have the confidence that he can answer them. And so he's just there. He reads his remarks and then walks out the door. But the reason that Biden gave the conference was to address the inflation concerns, except he didn't really talk about what's really happening. And of course, I wouldn't expect him to. He again blamed everything on the supply bottlenecks, right? It's all about these supply chain bottlenecks. It's got nothing to do with all the Fed money printing. It's got nothing to do with the president's own policies of paying people not to work or these massive budget deficits, right? None of this is the reason that we're experiencing these high prices. It's all about these pesky supply chain bottlenecks. And the government, with the help of Biden, they're going to solve the problem. They're going to fix it. So one thing that Biden reassured everybody was that the president was working with the ports out in California, to make sure that they are operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's his solution. Let's just make sure we have more people working at these ports. Of course, how are you going to get the workers? They're going to have to pay a lot of money to get all these extra workers, or if they're going to have the workers they've got to work overtime, right? That's going to cost even more money, because I think more likely they're going to be paying their existing workers overtime rather than finding new workers. And so it's going to cost a lot of money. And ultimately, those higher prices are going to be built in to the end consumer prices as well. But supposedly this is the solution to this problem. All we're doing there is trying to manage the imports. The reason that there's so much congestion at the ports is because we're importing so much stuff in the first place. If we had a more productive economy, if we actually can produce more of the stuff that we consume, we wouldn't have to import as much. And so the ports wouldn't be as congested with all the imports. The other problem is the trade isn't balanced. We have all this stuff coming in. We don't have stuff going out. So that screws up the whole process. It screws up the containers. The real solution involves making America more productive and more competitive so that we don't have to import as much stuff. We can make more stuff ourselves. And in fact, Biden even acknowledged that in this statement that he made. He expressed concern over the fact that we are too heavily reliant on imports, which is correct. He should be concerned. He should be more concerned than he is. And Biden says that he wants America to make more stuff. He wants us to produce more goods ourselves rather than rely on the productive capacity of other nations, especially nations that may not necessarily be our friends, right? And all that is true. But what was Biden's proposal to bring about more competitiveness in the U.S. economy? He referred to his Build Back Better plan. He said the way America is going to be more productive and more competitive is if we pass this $3.5 trillion spending bill to make the U.S. government bigger and more expensive. And then the government is going to spend this money so wisely that the result of that is that the economy is going to be more productive, and we're not going to need to rely on imports as much because of these investments that the government is going to make with our money. Of course, the opposite is going to be true. The more resources the Biden administration transfers from the private sector to the public sector, the less productive the U.S. economy will be. The the less competitive we'll be, the more reliant we will become on imports. In fact, what Biden doesn't understand is the reason America now runs these huge trade deficits, whereas in the past, we used to run huge trade surpluses, is because government is already so much bigger and so much of a greater burden on the productive part of the economy. That is the problem. So if Biden really wants to restore American competitiveness and American productivity, we need to restore the freedom and the opportunity that were destroyed by big government. So rather than passing this Build Back Better plan, we need to scrap the plan, and we need to work on eliminating a lot of the government programs that have already been passed so that we can cut government spending and free up those resources back to the private sector where they can be put to productive use. We need to get rid of a lot of burdensome regulation that have forced so much of our production to be outsourced. And we got to address the interest rate problem. The Fed has to let interest rates rise so that we stop gambling and speculating and funding all this nonsense, and we can actually fund legitimate production. We need businesses to invest in plant and equipment. We need savings. We need the consumer to stop spending and stop borrowing. And that means we need higher interest rates. So we're not going to get back to the type of economy that Biden is talking about, one where we're more self-reliant and independent because we produce ourselves, until the Federal Reserve lets these bubbles deflate and allows market forces to rebuild a more balanced economy, one that actually has savings and investment that facilitates domestic production of all the goods that we now rely on foreign nations to produce.
The Peter Schiff Show.